It was one of those rare afternoons when Eleanor Hart decided to step away from her busy life as a billionaire CEO. She had spent most of her day locked inside boardrooms, signing deals and making decisions that would shape industries. But today, something felt different, like she needed a break from all the glitz and glamour. So, she slipped into a simple pair of jeans, pulled on a hoodie, and walked out of her penthouse without telling anyone where she was going. Eleanor ended up at a small diner tucked away on the outskirts of New York City. It wasn't fancy or trendy. It was just an ordinary place with red booths, checkered floors, and the smell of coffee lingering in the air. As soon as she stepped inside, she noticed how alive it felt. Families laughed over pancakes, truck drivers sipped their coffee while reading newspapers, and waitresses darted around balancing plates like acrobats. Eleanor slid into a corner booth, ordering herself a cup of tea and a slice of pie. She wanted to blend in, to be just another face in the crowd for once. Her phone buzzed constantly beside her, a reminder of the emails and calls waiting for her attention, but she ignored them. For the first time in years, she simply sat there, watching people go about their lives. That's when she saw her. A young woman was working behind the counter, juggling orders with practiced ease. She looked tired but determined, moving quickly between tables while keeping an eye on a little girl sitting quietly near the entrance. The girl was in a wheelchair, her body small and fragile-looking. Her hands rested limply on her lap, and though she couldn't speak or move much, her eyes sparkled with curiosity as they followed the waitress's every move. Eleanor couldn't help but watch them. There was something special about the way the waitress interacted with the child. Every few minutes, she'd pause mid-task, glance toward the girl, and smile warmly before rushing back to work. Eventually, the waitress brought a plate of food to the table closest to the girl. While serving other customers, she carefully spoon-fed the child bite by bite, talking softly even though the girl couldn't respond. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, captivated. She didn't know what drew her attention more, the tenderness in the waitress's actions or the resilience shining through both of them despite obvious challenges. Whatever it was, it hit her hard. Something stirred deep within her chest, a mix of admiration, sadness, and maybe even guilt. As she sipped her tea, Eleanor found herself reflecting on her own life. She thought about her daughter, whom she barely saw anymore because of her demanding schedule. She remembered her late husband, who always told her that success wasn't measured by numbers on a balance sheet, but by the connections you made along the way. And now, sitting in this humble diner, she realized how disconnected she had become, not just from her family but from humanity itself. The waitress fed the last spoonful to the girl and wiped her mouth gently with a napkin. Then, she kissed the top of the girl's head and whispered something that made the child giggle silently. Eleanor smiled too, though her heart ached a little. She wondered what it must be like to live their life, to wake up each morning knowing the odds were stacked against you, yet choosing to face the world anyway. When the bill arrived, Eleanor paid without hesitation, leaving behind a generous tip. But as she stood up to leave, she hesitated. Something stopped her from walking out the door. Maybe it was the way the waitress had looked at the girl with such unconditional love, or maybe it was the flicker of hope she saw in their eyes despite everything they faced daily. Whatever it was, Eleanor knew this wasn't going to be her last visit to the diner. This expanded version focuses on building emotional depth and creating relatable moments. The tone is conversational yet engaging, aiming to draw readers into the scene naturally. Let me know if you'd like adjustments. Eleanor stepped out of the diner that day with a strange heaviness in her chest. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but the image of the waitress feeding her daughter kept replaying in her mind like a loop she couldn't stop. It wasn't just the tenderness of the moment. It was something deeper, something raw and real. She had seen love in its purest form, stripped of all pretense and material distractions. Back at her penthouse, Eleanor tried to distract herself by diving into work. She opened her laptop, scrolled through emails, and even joined a video call with her team. But no matter how hard she focused, her thoughts kept drifting back to the diner. She imagined what life must be like for the waitress and her daughter, waking up early, working long hours, struggling to make ends meet, yet somehow finding joy in the smallest things. Her own life suddenly felt hollow in comparison. Sure, she had everything money could buy, a luxurious apartment, designer clothes, private jets, but none of it seemed meaningful anymore. Her days were filled with meetings, deadlines, and endless responsibilities, leaving little room for anything else. She barely remembered the last time she'd laughed freely or spent quality time with her daughter. And her late husband? His voice echoed faintly in her memory, reminding her of the promises they'd made to each other. To live fully, to love deeply, and never lose sight of what truly mattered. That night, Eleanor lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep eluded her as questions swirled in her mind. What would it feel like to live like the waitress? To have so little yet still find happiness? Was it possible to balance ambition with compassion? These weren't easy answers to come by, but one thing was clear. The encounter at the diner had shaken her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, miles away in a modest two-bedroom apartment, the waitress was getting ready for another exhausting day. Life wasn't easy for her, but she refused to let anyone see her struggle. Every morning she woke up before sunrise to prepare breakfast, pack lunches, and ensure her daughter was comfortable before heading out to work. Some days she juggled 3 jobs just to keep food on the table and pay the mounting medical bills. Yet, despite the challenges, she always found reasons to smile. Her daughter, though unable to walk or talk, had a way of lighting up the room with her presence. Those big, curious eyes followed her everywhere, and every now and then, she'd let out a soft giggle that melted her mother's heart. They shared a bond that went beyond words, a silent understanding that no matter how tough things got, they had each other. But life wasn't without its hardships. There were nights when the waitress sat alone in the dim light of the kitchen, clutching unpaid bills and wondering how she'd manage. She dreamed of giving her daughter the best care possible, specialized therapies, better equipment, maybe even a chance to attend a school designed for children with disabilities. But those dreams felt impossibly far away, buried under the weight of financial strain. Still, she persevered. Each morning, she reminded herself that tomorrow could be better, that somewhere out there, someone might notice their struggles and offer a helping hand. Little did she know that help was already on its way. The next few days passed quickly for Eleanor. She couldn't shake off the feeling that she needed to do something. Money had always been her tool for solving problems, but this time, it felt personal. She started researching conditions like cerebral palsy online, reading about treatments, therapies, and support systems available for families. The more she learned, the more she realized how overwhelming it must be for parents navigating such challenges alone. One evening, while scrolling through articles, Eleanor stumbled upon a story about a child who had shown remarkable progress after receiving specialized therapy. The article mentioned how expensive these treatments were, often costing thousands of dollars per session. For families living paycheck to paycheck, accessing such care was nearly impossible. Eleanor sighed heavily, leaning back in her chair. She thought about the waitress again, how tirelessly she worked, how lovingly she cared for her daughter. How unfair it was that circumstances dictated whether someone could access basic necessities or not. An idea began forming in Eleanor's mind. What if she could step in quietly, anonymously, and ease some of the burden for the waitress and her daughter? It wouldn't change the world overnight, but it might make a difference in their lives. And maybe, just maybe, it would remind her of why she had built her empire in the first place, not for power or prestige, but to create opportunities where none existed. With newfound resolve, Eleanor decided to return to the diner. This time, she came prepared. She tucked an envelope filled with cash into her bag, enough to cover several months of rent and medical expenses. As she walked through the door, the familiar scent of coffee greeted her, along with the comforting hum of conversation. She chose the same corner booth, ordered her usual tea, and waited patiently. When the waitress approached to take her order, Eleanor smiled warmly, struck once again by the kindness in her eyes. After finishing her meal, Eleanor left the envelope discreetly in the bill folder and slipped out of the diner before anyone noticed. Later that evening, The waitress discovered the envelope while clearing the table. At first, she thought it was a mistake. Perhaps a customer had forgotten their wallet. But when she opened it and saw the neatly stacked bills, tears welled up in her eyes. She clutched the envelope tightly, overwhelmed by gratitude and disbelief. Who could have done this? Why would a stranger care so much? For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. Hope that things might get easier. Hope that her daughter could receive the care she deserved. Hope that kindness still existed in the world. As she held her daughter close that night, rocking her gently to sleep, she whispered a silent thank you to whoever had reached out. Somewhere out there, someone had seen their struggles and chosen to act. And though she didn't know it yet, that act of generosity would set off a chain reaction that would change both their lives forever. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter, its presence both comforting and surreal. The waitress stared at it for what felt like hours, her mind racing with questions. Who could have left it? Why would someone, a complete stranger, care enough to help them? She had spent years believing that no one noticed their struggles, that they were invisible in a world too busy to look twice. But now, here was proof that someone had seen them. Someone had cared. Her daughter sat nearby in her wheelchair, humming softly to herself as she often did when happy or content. The waitress glanced over at her, tears pricking her eyes. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, though more to herself than to the little girl. It wasn't just about the money. It was the hope it represented. For the first time in a long while, she dared to dream of a brighter future. A future where her daughter might get the care she needed, where they wouldn't have to worry about every penny, where life could feel a little less heavy. Over the next few days, the waitress began using the gift wisely. First, she paid off months of overdue rent, breathing a sigh of relief when the landlord smiled kindly, instead of glaring at her for being late again. Then, she booked an appointment with a specialist who had previously been out of reach due to cost. The doctor was warm and encouraging, explaining new therapies and treatments that could improve her daughter's mobility and communication skills. Each piece of good news filled her heart with gratitude, but also curiosity. She couldn't shake the feeling that this miracle had come from somewhere, or someone specific. Word spread quickly among the diner staff about the mysterious benefactor. Everyone had theories. Some thought it was a wealthy regular who frequented the place. Others joked it might be a celebrity stopping by incognito. The waitress didn't join in the speculation. Instead, she quietly held on to the memory of the woman in the corner booth, the one who always seemed to watch her and her daughter with thoughtful eyes. There was something familiar about her, though she couldn't quite place it. Maybe it was the way she carried herself or the kindness in her gaze. Whatever it was, it lingered in her mind. Meanwhile, Eleanor found herself returning to the diner almost daily. At first, she told herself it was coincidence, that she simply craved the comfort of the food or the simplicity of the atmosphere. But deep down, she knew better. Part of her wanted to see how her gift was making a difference. Another part of her couldn't resist the pull of the waitress and her daughter. Their resilience inspired her in ways she hadn't expected. Each visit gave her a chance to observe them more closely. She noticed how the waitress moved with purpose, balancing plates and refilling coffee cups, while still finding moments to check on her daughter. She saw how the little girl's face lit up whenever her mother approached, even if all she could do was blink or smile faintly. These small interactions spoke volumes about their bond, a connection so strong, it transcended words. Eleanor started, striking up casual conversations during her visits. She'd ask the waitress how her day was going or compliment the food, anything to break the ice. Slowly but surely, the waitress warmed up to her, sharing snippets of her life without realizing who Eleanor truly was. She talked about her dreams for her daughter, her fears about the future, and the exhaustion that came with juggling work and caregiving. Eleanor listened intently, nodding along and offering words of encouragement when appropriate. One afternoon, after finishing her meal, Eleanor decided to take things a step further. She handed the waitress a business card, pretending it belonged to a friend. "This person specializes in pediatric care," she said casually. "They've helped a lot of families in similar situations. Thought you might want to check them." The waitress looked at the card, then back at Eleanor, surprise flickering across her face. "Really? You think they'd— I mean, we can't afford— They offer payment plans," Eleanor interrupted gently. "And trust me, they're worth it." For a moment, the waitress hesitated, clutching the card tightly. Then she nodded, her voice soft but sincere. "Thank you. I don't know why you're helping us, but thank you." Eleanor smiled, brushing off the gratitude with a wave of her hand. "Just passing along some information. That's all." But inside, her heart swelled. She hadn't planned to reveal herself, not yet anyway. But seeing the waitress's reaction made her realize how much she wanted to keep helping. This wasn't just about writing a check or making a donation. It was about building a bridge, creating a connection that went beyond charity. It was about reminding herself, and perhaps the waitress too, that humanity thrived on kindness, not wealth. As weeks turned into months, the changes became noticeable. With access to better care, the waitress's daughter started showing signs of improvement. Her fingers twitched slightly when she reached for toys, and her laughter grew louder, filling the room with joy. The waitress marveled at these milestones, documenting each one with photos and videos. For the first time in years, she felt like she was moving forward instead of standing still. At the diner, her co-workers noticed the shift in her demeanor. She smiled more often, laughed freely, and seemed lighter somehow. When asked what had changed, she shrugged modestly, attributing it to a stroke of luck. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. Someone out there believed in her, and her daughter, and that belief had sparked a chain reaction of positivity. Eleanor watched all of this unfold from the sidelines, careful not to intrude too much. Yet she couldn't deny the sense of fulfillment she felt. Helping this family had awakened something within her, a desire to use her resources not just for profit, but for purpose. She started researching organizations that supported families of children with disabilities, attending fundraisers and meeting people who shared her vision. Slowly but surely, she began expanding her efforts beyond the diner. Still, she kept coming back to that same corner booth, sipping her tea and watching the waitress and her daughter interact. Something about their story resonated deeply with her. Perhaps it was because they reminded her of what really mattered in life. Or maybe it was because, in helping them, she had rediscovered a part of herself she thought she'd lost. Whatever the reason, Eleanor knew this journey was far from over. Little did she know the best was yet to come. This expanded version adds layers of emotion, builds suspense, and keeps readers engaged by focusing on the evolving relationship between the two main characters. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments. It wasn't long before the waitress began noticing subtle changes in her life, changes that seemed almost too good to be true. The specialist Eleanor had recommended turned out to be exactly what they needed. He was patient, kind, and genuinely invested in helping her daughter improve. With his guidance, the little girl started attending physical therapy sessions twice a week. Slowly but surely, she began making progress. Her hands, once limp and unresponsive, now twitched slightly when she tried to reach for a toy. Her laughter grew louder, filling the room with a sound so pure it made her mother's heart swell. The waitress couldn't help but wonder if this was all connected to the mysterious benefactor who had left the envelope of cash. Every time she thought about it, a wave of gratitude washed over her. She didn't know who this person was, but whoever they were, they had given her more than just financial relief. They had given her hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Meanwhile, Eleanor continued visiting the diner regularly. At first, she kept her involvement quiet, content to observe from afar. But as time went on, she found herself drawn deeper into their world. She started asking casual questions about the therapies and treatments, pretending to be curious rather than personally invested. The waitress opened up willingly, sharing stories about her daughter's progress and the challenges they still faced. Each conversation brought them closer, though neither woman realized it yet. One afternoon, Eleanor arrived at the diner earlier than usual. The place was quieter, with only a few customers scattered around. The waitress greeted her warmly, balancing a tray of drinks while keeping an eye on her daughter, who sat nearby playing with a colorful rattle. Eleanor took her usual seat in the corner booth, watching as the waitress expertly juggled her tasks. There was something mesmerizing about the way she moved, with purpose, grace, and unwavering determination. After finishing her meal, Eleanor hesitated before leaving. Something inside her urged her to say more, to reveal the truth. She approached the waitress, who was clearing a nearby table. "You've done an incredible job," Eleanor said softly, her voice sincere. "Your daughter is lucky to have you." The waitress looked surprised by the compliment but smiled shyly. "Thank you. I just do what I can." Eleanor nodded, then added, "I've been meaning to ask, how are things going with the therapist? Has he been helpful?" The waitress's eyes lit up. "Oh yes, Lily loves him, and she's improving so much. I never thought we'd see this kind of progress. Honestly, I don't even know how to thank whoever helped us get here." Eleanor felt a lump form in her throat. This was the moment she had been avoiding, the moment when she would have to decide whether to reveal herself or stay hidden. For weeks she had wrestled with the question. On one hand, she feared ruining the purity of her actions by attaching her name to them. On the other hand, she wanted to build a real connection, not just remain a shadowy figure in the background. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor finally spoke. "Actually, it was me." The waitress froze, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. "I'm the one who left the envelope," Eleanor admitted, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside her. "And I gave you the therapist's card. I wanted to help, but I didn't want to intrude. I hope you're not upset." For a moment, the waitress simply stared at her, processing the words. Then, tears welled up in her eyes. "Upset? No, I'm overwhelmed. You've changed our lives. Why would you do this for us? We're strangers." Eleanor shook her head gently. "Because everyone deserves a chance. Because I saw how hard you work, how much you love your daughter. That's worth supporting." The waitress blinked back tears, struggling to find the right words. "I don't know how to repay you," she whispered. "You don't have to," Eleanor replied firmly. "This isn't about repayment. It's about doing the right thing." Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened. Eleanor stopped, hiding behind anonymity, and embraced her role as a mentor and friend. She introduced the waitress to organizations that provided grants and scholarships for families like hers. She connected her with support groups where she could share experiences and advice with others facing similar challenges. And most importantly, she listened, really listened, to the waitress's hopes, fears, and dreams. Through these conversations, Eleanor learned more about the waitress's life. Beneath the surface of exhaustion and struggle lay a talented artist. Before her daughter was born, she had painted vibrant landscapes and portraits, selling her work at local markets. But after years of focusing solely on survival, she had set aside her brushes, believing there was no room for art in her chaotic world. Eleanor encouraged her to pick them up again. "Art is part of who you are," she said during one of their talks. "Don't let it go. Maybe it could even become a source of income someday." At first, the waitress laughed off the idea. "With everything else going on, I barely have time to sleep, let alone paint." But Eleanor persisted. "Start small. Even 10 minutes a day can make a difference. Trust me, you won't regret it." Reluctantly, the waitress agreed to try. She dug out her old paints and canvases from the closet and set them up in a corner of the living room. At first, it felt strange, like trying to step back into a version of herself she hadn't seen in years. But as she dipped her brush into the colors and began creating again, something magical happened. The stress melted away, replaced by a sense of peace and joy she hadn't felt in ages. Her paintings quickly gained attention. Friends and family admired her work, encouraging her to share it online. With Eleanor's help, she created a website showcasing her art. To her astonishment, orders started pouring in. from strangers across the country who were touched by her story and inspired by her talent. As the waitress's confidence grew, so did her dreams. One evening, while discussing future plans with Eleanor, she voiced an idea that had been brewing in her mind. "What if we started something bigger?" she asked hesitantly. "Something to help other families like mine. A foundation, maybe?" Eleanor's face lit up. "That's a wonderful idea. Let's make it happen." Together, they began laying the groundwork for a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting families of children with disabilities. They reached out to experts, fundraisers, and volunteers, pooling resources and expertise to bring the vision to life. For the waitress, it was a chance to give back, to turn her struggles into strength and her pain into purpose. For Eleanor, it was an opportunity to use her wealth and influence for something truly meaningful. By the time the foundation launched, both women had transformed in ways they never imagined. The waitress, once weighed down by despair, now radiated hope and determination. Her daughter continued to thrive, reaching new milestones every day. And Eleanor, who had once felt disconnected from the world, rediscovered the joy of human connection. Their bond, forged through kindness and mutual respect, became unbreakable. What started as a simple act of generosity had blossomed into something extraordinary, a partnership built on trust, compassion, and shared purpose. Neither of them knew what the future held, but one thing was certain: their lives would never be the same again. The foundation quickly became more than just an idea. It turned into a beacon of hope for families who had spent years feeling invisible. The waitress poured her heart into the project, working tirelessly alongside Eleanor to ensure it would make a real difference. They named it Wings of Hope, inspired by the belief that every child deserves a chance to soar, no matter their circumstances. Their mission was simple yet powerful: to provide support, resources, and advocacy for families navigating the challenges of raising children with disabilities. At first, the workload felt overwhelming. Between managing the diner, caring for her daughter, and building the foundation, the waitress often found herself stretched thin. But she refused to give up. Every early morning wake-up call, every late-night brainstorming session, and every sleepless night was worth it, because she knew they were creating something meaningful. Eleanor stood by her side through it all, offering guidance, encouragement, and financial backing when needed. Together, they made an unstoppable team. One evening, as they sat in Eleanor's penthouse going over plans for an upcoming fundraiser, the waitress looked up from her notes and smiled. "Do you ever stop to think about how far we've come?" she asked. "A year ago, I was just trying to get through each day. Now look at us. We're actually making a difference." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "It's amazing what can happen when people come together with a shared goal. But honestly, none of this would have been possible without you. You're the heart of this foundation." The waitress blushed, unused to receiving such praise. "I couldn't have done any of this without your help," she replied. "You believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself." Their partnership had grown stronger with time, rooted in mutual respect and admiration. Eleanor admired the waitress's resilience and creativity, while the waitress marveled at Eleanor's vision and generosity. Despite their vastly different backgrounds, they complemented each other perfectly, like two halves of a whole. As word spread about Wings of Hope, the response was overwhelming. Families reached out, sharing their stories and expressing gratitude for finally being seen and heard. Donors stepped forward, eager to contribute to a cause that promised tangible change. Volunteers signed up, bringing energy and enthusiasm to events and campaigns. It seemed like everyone wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. The waitress discovered a newfound confidence during this process. She began speaking at community meetings and conferences, sharing her journey and advocating for others in similar situations. At first, public speaking terrified her. She worried about stumbling over her words or saying the wrong thing. But Eleanor reassured her, reminding her that authenticity mattered more than perfection. And sure enough, audiences connected deeply with her heartfelt speeches. Her vulnerability resonated with listeners, inspiring them to take action. Her art, also played a crucial role in spreading awareness. She created paintings that captured the essence of motherhood, disability, and resilience. One piece, titled Unbreakable Bond, depicted a mother cradling her child against a backdrop of swirling colors, a visual representation of love conquering adversity. It struck a chord with viewers, becoming the centerpiece of the foundation's promotional materials. Eleanor watched all of this unfold with pride. Seeing the waitress transform from someone weighed down by life's burdens to a confident, empowered advocate filled her with a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced in years. For so long, she had focused solely on building her business, empire, driven by ambition and competition. Now she realized true success lay not in profit margins but in impact. Changing lives, even just one, was infinitely more rewarding than climbing corporate ladders. Meanwhile, the waitress's daughter continued to thrive under the care and attention she now received. Thanks to specialized therapies and equipment, funded by Wings of Hope, she made remarkable progress. Her movements became more coordinated, her laughter louder, and her ability to communicate through gestures more pronounced. Watching her grow and develop brought immeasurable joy to her mother, who celebrated every milestone as if it were a miracle. But perhaps the most beautiful part of their transformation was the bond they shared with Eleanor. What started as a chance encounter at a diner had blossomed into something resembling family. Eleanor visited them regularly, joining them for meals, movie nights, and holidays. She spoiled the little girl with gifts and affection, treating her like a second granddaughter. In return, the waitress welcomed Eleanor into their lives with open arms, grateful for the love and support she offered. For Eleanor, these moments were priceless. After losing her husband years earlier, she had buried herself in work, using busyness as a shield against grief. But spending time with the waitress and her daughter reminded her of the importance of connection and presence. They taught her to slow down, savor the present, and cherish the people who mattered most. As the months passed, Wings of Hope gained momentum, expanding its reach beyond local communities to national platforms. The foundation hosted galas, workshops, and awareness campaigns, drawing attention to issues affecting families of children with disabilities. Celebrities lent their voices, corporations donated funds, and media outlets covered their efforts extensively. Yet, despite the growing recognition, the waitress and Eleanor remained grounded, staying true to their original mission. One particularly memorable event took place on a crisp autumn evening. Hundreds of guests gathered at a grand ballroom to celebrate the foundation's achievements and raise money for future projects. The waitress stood nervously at the podium, clutching her notes as she prepared to deliver her speech. Eleanor sat in the front row, giving her an encouraging smile. When the waitress began speaking, her voice trembled slightly, but her words carried immense weight. She talked about the struggles she and her daughter had faced, the kindness of strangers who had helped them, and the power of coming together as a community. By the end of her speech, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. People applauded long and loud, moved by her courage and determination. Afterward, Eleanor joined her on stage, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "This is just the beginning," she whispered. "We've only scratched the surface of what we can achieve." The waitress nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I never imagined my life could turn out like this," she admitted. "But I'm so glad it did." That night, as they drove home together, Eleanor reflected on how much had changed, not just in the waitress's life but in her own. Helping others had awakened something within her, reigniting a passion for making the world a better place. She no longer saw wealth as a tool for personal gain. Instead, she viewed it as a means to uplift those in need. For the waitress, the journey had been transformative in ways she couldn't have predicted. She had gone from surviving to thriving, finding strength in vulnerability and purpose in adversity. Her dreams, once buried under layers of hardship, now burned brighter than ever. Together, they proved that compassion could transcend boundaries, uniting people from different walks of life in pursuit of a common goal. And though challenges still lay ahead, they faced them with unwavering resolve, knowing they weren't alone. Little did they know their story was far from over. Years passed, And the ripple effects of Eleanor and the Waitress's partnership continued to spread far and wide. Wings of Hope had grown from a small local initiative into a nationwide movement, touching countless lives along the way. Families, who once felt isolated and overwhelmed, now found themselves part of a supportive community. Children with disabilities received access to cutting-edge therapies, adaptive equipment, and educational programs tailored to their needs. Parents learned how to navigate the complex world of medical care, insurance, and advocacy, empowered by workshops and mentorship programs. The foundation became more than just an organization. It was a lifeline. It gave people hope when they thought all was lost, strength when they felt weak, and connection when they believed no one understood their struggles. For many, it was proof that kindness still existed in the world, even in its darkest corners. 4. The Waitress' life transformed in ways she never imagined. Her days of juggling multiple jobs while caring for her daughter were behind her. With Eleanor's help, she transitioned into working full-time for Wings of Hope, leading initiatives and speaking at events across the country. Her art, once a forgotten passion, flourished as well. Galleries showcased her work, collectors purchased her paintings, and fans praised her ability to capture raw emotion on canvas. She used the proceeds to fund scholarships for other artists with disabilities, ensuring that creativity remained accessible to everyone. Her daughter thrived too, blossoming into a bright, curious child who brought joy wherever she went. Though she still faced challenges, the progress she made was nothing short of miraculous. She could hold objects with greater control, communicate using assistive devices, and express herself through laughter and gestures. Watching her grow filled the Waitress with immense pride, reminding her daily of why she fought so hard to create a better future. Eleanor, meanwhile, stepped back from her corporate role entirely. After decades spent climbing the ladder of success, she realized her true purpose lay elsewhere. She dedicated herself fully to philanthropy, using her wealth and influence to amplify voices often ignored by society. Together with the Waitress, she launched new campaigns, expanded outreach efforts, and partnered with global organizations to tackle systemic issues affecting families of children with disabilities. Their friendship deepened over time, evolving into something akin to family. Eleanor adopted the Waitress and her daughter into her extended circle, celebrating birthdays, holidays, and milestones together. They traveled, laughed, and shared stories late into the night, forming bonds that transcended age, background, and circumstance. To anyone watching, it was clear they had found something rare, a connection built on trust, love, and mutual respect. One evening, Eleanor stood backstage at a charity gala, adjusting her earrings nervously. Tonight was special, not only because it marked the 5th anniversary of Wings of Hope, but also because she had been asked to deliver the keynote speech. As she waited for her cue, she glanced out at the audience. The room buzzed with excitement, filled with familiar faces, volunteers, donors, beneficiaries, and supporters. Among them sat the Waitress and her daughter, smiling proudly from the front row. When Eleanor finally stepped onto the stage, the applause was thunderous. She took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in before beginning her speech. "Good evening," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her chest. "Tonight we celebrate not just 5 years of Wings of Hope, but the incredible resilience and determination of the families we serve." She paused, scanning the crowd. "True wealth isn't measured in dollars or possessions," she continued. "It's found in moments of connection, acts of kindness, and the courage to change someone's life forever. When I first walked into that diner years ago, I didn't know my life was about to change. I saw a young mother feeding her daughter with such tenderness that it stopped me in my tracks. That moment reminded me of what truly matters, not money or power, but love." Her gaze shifted to the Waitress, who wiped away tears as she listened. What began as a simple act of generosity grew into something extraordinary. Because of her strength, her creativity, and her unwavering spirit, we've created a movement that empowers families and gives them hope. And because of all of you, our donors, volunteers, and supporters, we've turned that hope into action. The audience erupted in applause, moved by her heartfelt words. Eleanor smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment wash over her. This was where she belonged, not in boardrooms or corner offices, but here, surrounded by people who cared deeply about making the world a better place. After the event, the three of them, Eleanor, the waitress, and her daughter, sat together in a quiet corner of the venue. Plates of dessert sat untouched as they reflected on how far they'd come. "Do you remember that day in the diner?" the waitress asked softly, breaking the silence. Eleanor chuckled. "How could I forget? You were running around like a whirlwind, balancing plates and keeping an eye on your little one. I couldn't take my eyes off you, and I couldn't figure out why you kept staring," the waitress teased, grinning. "I thought maybe I had spinach stuck in my teeth or something." They laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Then the waitress grew serious, reaching across the table to squeeze Eleanor's hand. "Thank you for everything, not just for helping us, but for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Eleanor shook her head. "Don't thank me. You did all the hard work. I just opened a door. You walked through it." The waitress smiled, glancing down at her daughter, who was happily playing with a toy. "We both did," she corrected gently. "Together." As the years rolled on, the legacy of Wings of Hope continued to grow. Schools adopted inclusive curriculums inspired by the Foundation's model. Hospitals implemented training programs for staff to better support patients with disabilities. Even policymakers took notice, introducing legislation aimed at improving accessibility and affordability of care. But beyond the accolades and achievements, the true impact of their work was felt in quieter, more personal ways. It was in the smile of a parent who finally saw their child take their first steps, in the laughter of siblings playing alongside each other without barriers, in the gratitude of strangers who discovered they weren't alone. For Eleanor and the waitress, the journey was proof that even the smallest acts of kindness could spark monumental change. They had started with nothing more than compassion and determination, and look where it had led them. On a sunny afternoon years later, Eleanor sat beside the waitress in the same diner where it all began. The little girl, now a teenager, sat nearby, chatting animatedly with friends. The waitress looked around, taking in the familiar sights and sounds. "Funny how things turn out, isn't it?" she mused. Eleanor nodded, sipping her tea. "Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it." The waitress smiled, leaning back in her chair. "And sometimes those surprises are exactly what we need." As they sat there together watching the world go by, they knew they had created something lasting, not just for themselves, but for generations to come. Their story was one of hope, resilience, and the unshakable belief that love always finds a way to shine through. Years had rolled by, and the diner where it all began still stood, a humble yet enduring symbol of where Eleanor and the waitress's paths first crossed. The small eatery hadn't changed much. Its red vinyl booths were slightly faded, and the checkered floors bore faint scuff marks from countless footsteps. But for Eleanor and the waitress, it held a special place in their hearts. It was more than just a building. It was the starting point of a journey that had transformed not only their lives, but also the lives of thousands of others. One crisp autumn morning, Eleanor returned to the diner, this time accompanied by the waitress and her now teenage daughter. The girl, who had once been unable to move or communicate beyond faint gestures, sat confidently in her wheelchair, her face glowing with excitement. She wore a bright yellow sweater that matched her cheerful demeanor, and she clutched a sketchbook filled with drawings she'd been working on. Art had become her language, a way to express herself when words fell short. As they entered the diner, the familiar scent of coffee and pancakes greeted them. The waitress smiled nostalgically, remembering how many hours she'd spent rushing between tables, balancing plates while keeping an eye on her daughter. Now things were different. She no longer worked here full-time. Her focus was entirely on Wings of Hope, but the owner always welcomed her back like family. Eleanor chose their usual booth near the window, sliding into the seat with ease. The waitress helped her daughter settle in, adjusting her chair so she could see outside. "Do you remember coming here when you were little?" the waitress asked, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. The girl nodded enthusiastically, pointing to the counter where she used to sit quietly while her mother worked. The waitress chuckled softly. You were such a good girl back then. Always patient, even when I couldn't give you as much attention as I wanted. Her daughter grinned, opening her sketchbook to show them a drawing she'd made earlier that week. It depicted the three of them sitting together at the diner, surrounded by swirls of color that seemed to radiate warmth and happiness. Eleanor leaned closer, marveling at the detail. This is incredible, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You're so talented, the waitress beamed with pride. She gets it from me, she joked, earning laughter from everyone at the table. For a moment, they simply sat there, soaking in the joy of being together. Later that day, they visited a community center funded by Wings of Hope. It was one of several facilities across the country designed to provide resources and support for families of children with disabilities. Inside, the space buzzed with activity. Kids laughed as they played adaptive sports, parents attended workshops led by experts, and volunteers guided participants through art therapy sessions. Every corner of the center brimmed with life and purpose. The waitress walked around, greeting people warmly and checking in on ongoing activities. She stopped to talk to a young boy who was struggling to use his new communication device. Kneeling beside him, she offered gentle encouragement until he managed to form a sentence. His face lit up with pride, and his mother hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Watching moments like these never failed to remind the waitress why she poured her heart into this work. Eleanor trailed behind, observing quietly. She noticed how effortlessly the waitress connected with people, how her presence seemed to calm frazzled nerves and lift spirits. It was a gift, one that Eleanor admired deeply. As she watched, she realized something profound. The waitress wasn't just helping others heal, she was healing herself too. All those years of hardship, sacrifice, and uncertainty had shaped her into someone resilient, compassionate, and unshakably strong. At the end of the tour, they gathered in the main hall for a surprise announcement. The waitress stepped onto a small stage, holding a microphone nervously. Thank you all for welcoming us today, she began, her voice steady despite the flutter of butterflies in her stomach. This place means so much to me because it represents everything we've worked for over the years. But today, I'm here to share some exciting news. She paused, glancing at Eleanor, who gave her an encouraging nod. We've decided to expand our reach even further. Starting next year, we'll be opening similar centers in 5 more cities across the country. These spaces will offer the same resources, programs, and support you've come to rely on, and hopefully inspire even more communities to come together. The room erupted in cheers, applause echoing off the walls. People hugged each other, overcome with gratitude and excitement. One woman approached the waitress afterward, tears streaming down her face. You have no idea what this means to us, she whispered. Knowing there's a place where my son feels accepted, it's everything. The waitress hugged her back, blinking away her own tears. That's why we do this, she replied softly. No one should feel alone. Back at Eleanor's penthouse later that evening, the three of them sat together reflecting on the day's events. The city lights twinkled beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a soft glow over the room. The waitress's daughter flipped through her sketchbook, showing off her latest creations while Eleanor sipped tea and listened intently. You know, Eleanor said after a long pause, I never imagined my life would turn out like this. When I first started my company, I thought success meant climbing higher and accumulating more. But now I realize, true success is about leaving the world better than you found it. The waitress nodded thoughtfully. And finding people who remind you of what really matters, she added. If it weren't for you, none of this would have been possible. Eleanor shook her head. You give me too much credit. You're the one who inspired me to change, to see the world differently. You reminded me that wealth isn't about what you own. It's about what you give. They sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of those words sink in. Outside, the city continued its restless hum, but inside, everything felt peaceful. They had built something extraordinary, not just an organization or a movement, but a legacy rooted in love and compassion. Months turned into years, and the foundation kept growing. New chapters opened, new stories unfolded, and new connections formed. Families who had once felt invisible now stood tall, empowered by the knowledge that they mattered. Children who had faced unimaginable challenges discovered strengths they never knew they had. And through it all, Eleanor and the waitress remained steadfast partners, guiding wings of hope with wisdom, humility, and unwavering dedication. Their bond deepened with time, becoming a source of strength for both of them. They celebrated victories together, mourned losses together, and faced challenges side by side. To anyone watching, it was clear they had created something rare, a friendship that transcended circumstances, a partnership built on trust and shared purpose. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, the waitress turned to Eleanor with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met that day in the diner?" Eleanor smiled, leaning back in her chair. "Sometimes. But then I think, maybe it wasn't just chance. Maybe it was supposed to happen." The waitress nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Well, I'm glad it did. You saved us not just with money, but with hope. And now, because of you, we're saving others." Eleanor reached over, squeezing her hand gently. "We saved each other." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, they sat quietly, content in the knowledge that their story was far from over. Together they had proven that even the smallest acts of kindness could spark monumental change. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly bring its share of challenges, they faced it with courage, knowing they weren't alone. Because sometimes all it takes is one person to believe in you, and one moment to change your life forever.